we lower the rate, because we don't pay taxes as a general rule for stuff that we buy over the internet. And what's the third reason? Does anybody have any ideas what the third reason might be? There's another reason? Actually, there's two more. One of them is we don't pay sales tax on services. So when you get your hair cut, you don't pay sales tax. If you have a lawn service, you don't pay sales tax. If you go get a massage, you don't pay sales tax. All of those things. And as Henry Sobonet, the current budget director, likes to talk about, I'd love to hear him talk about this, because he and his wife don't have children. And they both are professionals, and so they have, good disposable income. And so he talks about how horror-stricken his family is when they hear where they spend their money. Like, it's like doggy daycare. The once a month, or once a week massage. Things that, I'm all about it. But his parents, I can't figure out why anybody would spend their money there. Well, interestingly enough, that's where they spend their money, but none of those things are taxed through the sales tax. In 1959, out of every consumer dollar that was spent, 60 cents of it was spent on a good and was therefore taxed through our sales tax system. And 40% was spent on services. By 2009, those percentages had just reversed. So today, for every dollar of consumer purchases, we spend 40 cents on goods and 60% on services. So we're taking more of those dollars that used to generate money to support our schools and our roads and our healthcare system, and we're spending them, but they're not generating revenue to support the public services that really do form the foundation of our communities. That's the third reason. The last reason is because we just started exempting stuff. We just decided that we're gonna give certain people tax advantages. So we're going to say certain products you don't have to pay taxes on. The most popular one, the one that's always the best to talk about in public because it always makes everybody laugh, is bull semen. Right? Back in the mid-'80s, we exempted the sale of semen, bull semen, from sales taxes. Now, we can start down the path of talking about how horrible that is. It's this, like, why do we treat farmers differently, and why are cows any different than, chickens or whatever else you want to think about. But the really interesting thing from a tax policy nerd like me, what my perspective on that is, it's actually not that wacky. Because one of the big areas that we exempt from sales tax are something called component products. We have this idea that we don't want to do something we call tax pyramiding, where if you're making, let's say, aprons, and you applique the aprons. If you go out and you buy the fabric to make the aprons and the threads and the little buttons to do the applique and all of that stuff, you don't have to pay sales taxes on all of those products that go into that apron, and then when you sell the apron, you collect taxes on it, right? The idea is if you tax the material and you tax the thread and you tax the buttons, then that will artificially increase the cost. And that's called tax pyramiding. So we don't do that in general for sales tax. Well, bull semen to beef is what fabric is to an apron, right? You can't have a cow without it. So while we like to, so there are a lot of exemptions. So there's rational reasons why decision makers made those decisions that they made along the line. But what's happened is the base upon which we apply taxes has gotten much, much, much smaller. And that's why we see a 25% reduction in this taxes collected per $1,000 of income for sales taxes. For corporate income taxes, that same statistic I've been talking about since 1999 has gone per $1,000 of income has gone down 39%. I can go down a long list. I can't remember all the statistics. I'd have to go to this rolled up thing of paper here, and I don't want to have to sort through it. But just trust me, I can show you when we get done, that everything but one tax of our major taxes has fallen in the last percentage per $1,000 of income over the last since 1999. Do you even know what that is? One that's gone up? Tobacco. And why is that? Because we went to the ballot and voted in favor of Amendment 35, which increased the taxes on sale of tobacco. And it was designed to be used exclusively to help with offset the cost or to underwrite the cost of smoking cessation programs. Okay, so that's the only one that's gone up. We've underfunded our schools, like I talked about. Currently, we're about almost $2,000 per pupil below the national average in spending in K-12 education. Money's not the only thing, I understand that. There are other things that need to be done. But you know, there's a lot of discussion out there right now about how we need to reform the way we provide public education. Because it's true, there are a lot of kids who aren't getting what they need out of public schools. And let me just say, when you compare what we're doing in Colorado versus what other states are doing, we're on the absolute cutting edge of reforming and accountability and performance-based education. We're really trying to figure out how to do it right, but the problem is we're not spending on it. And those two things have to go hand in hand. It isn't one or the other. And we're already way down the path on reform. We have one of the most welcoming charter school laws in the country. Whether you like it or don't like it, doesn't really make any difference, but we're out there. We're out there reforming public education in everything except for the way that we fund it. And like I said, we're almost today, the most recent statistics are we're about $2,000 below the national average in spending per pupil. We dropped just between last year, well, actually between the year that we just ended with our public schools for K-12 education and where we're going to be when the kids start back in August, we're $397 a kid less than we were. Now, I don't know what's going to happen over the summer that is going to make it suddenly possible for those teachers sitting in a room of 20 kids to be able to do it somehow better with $6,000 less. I don't get it. Well, they won't be doing it for 20 kids, I can tell you that. It'll be a few more than that. I assume you've been following the stories about what's going on in Douglas County and in Jefferson County and in Adams County, where they're talking about charging to send kids on a school bus. What are we going to do here in Denver? We're going to put them on the RTD. We're going to get rid of transportation services. We're going to let the kids use public transportation. Now, I don't really have a problem with kids learning how to use the bus. I think it's a good thing. But is that the most efficient and effective use of their time, our time, and the resources? I don't know, maybe. But that's where we're going with DPS. Yes, sir?
How far down does that go? I mean, how young are they going to be putting them on the bus?
I don't know what they're going to... I don't know if it starts at middle school. I honestly don't know. But that's one of the considerations right now, is to get rid of... Because everybody's trying to figure out how you cut money. Do you cut teachers out of classrooms? Or do you cut out bus drivers? And you notice I've said it in that way, because there really are jobs associated with all this. It's one of my favorite conversations that are going on right now. There isn't any wealth production. The taxes are not wealth producing. My organization, the Colorado Fiscal Policy Institute, just did a study a few weeks ago, or released a study a few weeks ago that used an input-output model. You know what that is? It's an economic model that are used all the time by businesses to talk about the return on investment for particular decisions. We found that there's about a 1.6 multiplier for every dollar that's invested in public, for all public investments. That money gets spent. We don't save public money. We give it to people in terms of salaries or goods. And public employees go out to lunch. They buy stuff from the local retailer. They avoid taxes and buy stuff online, just like all the rest of us do. And so this idea somehow that when we pay taxes and buy services, that's lost goods from the economy doesn't make any sense. In fact, the way we look at it is the exact opposite. You get a double bang for your buck. Not only do you have the economic multiplier effect of people having jobs and working, and then employing other people because they're creating demands for all of those things out there, public employees are also providing the community services that really do provide the foundation for economic activity. It is about education, folks. We hear this discussion all the time, economic development. Think about it as a logic model for just a minute. We offer you a tax break to create a job. Our income tax rate, which very few corporations actually pay, nationally it's 1 in 16 actually pay any kind of income taxes at all. But let's assume for a minute you have a corporation. Let's don't even talk about corporations. Let's talk about small business, because that's where most of the jobs are created in Colorado anyway. So you have a small business that's creating 10 or 12 jobs. That's sort of a typical sized business. And you say they don't have to pay their income tax for a year. That income tax amount that they will save doesn't come close to matching the salary that they're going to have to pay when they create that job. Tax policy doesn't create jobs. It changes the profitability calculus. It makes companies or organizations slightly more profitable if they have to spend less on taxes. But if their employees are spending more time on the road because the roads are congested, if they're spending more time training their employees because they're not getting to them with the educational needs that they have in order to do their job, if they're sending them back to the university to get the advanced training that they need to conduct that job, it more than offsets the tax. And we want to support small businesses in our community. Why don't we all pay a little more so that they can get the workers that they need that already come with the education that they need? Now that's my pitch to what we ought to do. And I am really excited. I can talk on and on. You know, you can tell I could go on. I can talk about higher education. Let me just throw out a couple statistics before I talk about the proposal that you'll hopefully be voting on in November. But in higher education, again, we rank consistently at the bottom. Metro is going to be increasing fees and tuition is going to go up 22%, almost 23% for students enrolled at Metro. These are not the Californians that are coming here to go and ski in Boulder. Boulder's a great school. There's a lot of people that are going to school for great education, but you know, we really do charge out-of-state folks $42,000 a year to come from out of state to go to CU Boulder. That's not who's going to Metro. We're not gouging the other guy. The people who are going to Metro right now are the people who are trying to get an education, to invest in themselves so that they're well-positioned when we come out of this recession. Many of them, we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of students, many of them are folks who don't have a job right now. And they're taking this hiatus, probably not one that they wanted, but to add skills, add knowledge, become better innovators, so that when the economy starts to pick up, they're in a position to be a stronger contributor. But that's who's at Metro. It's not that guy who's going to trying to get the French degree. And I'm not critical. I just want to be clear, I'm all about university education. I got 2 kids that are going to private school. I think it's all about university. I love university education. But where we're seeing so much growth in our university system right now is not in that university education. It is in skill and knowledge acquisition for the point of simply an economic decision to get a job. We're going to see 20% increases at CSU. I think CU is going to cap their increases at about 9% this year. Somebody told me once that just not long ago that they had a kid that will be a senior at CU. Has anybody got kids at any of the universities? Somebody told me they had a 45% increase in the price of the cost of tuition from the time their child was a freshman to a sophomore. Does that sound about right to you? Now, that's a tough thing to plan for. I mean, that's a pretty significant increase over a relatively short period of time. It's not much different in healthcare. Our healthcare component, the part of our budget that we spend on healthcare is growing. And this is always one of my favorite conversations for a group like this. We have 150,000 more people on Medicaid today than we did 10 years ago. And that's shocking. It's hard to pay for. Some people don't understand it. But I want to be really clear, that's by design. It's by design. Somewhere along the line in our society, we decided that it's good for people to have health insurance. Most people get their health insurance because they're employed, right? Most folks get their insurance because they're connected to a job. We've had record high unemployment, which means there are a record number of people who don't have a job. Which means there's a record number of people who don't have access to privately provided health insurance. We design a system, it's called a counter-cyclical program, so that when demand goes up, as the economy stinks, we as a community step in. Now there are two reasons, two big motivations for that. One is because some people think it's just the right thing to do. But there's a bunch of people who say it doesn't have anything to do with being the right thing to do, it's just cheaper. Because if those people don't have health insurance, if you don't have health insurance, it doesn't mean you don't get sick or get in an accident. I mean, if that were the case, can you put that on the list for next year? Pass Senate Bill 1 that says, you know, if you don't have health insurance, you don't get to get sick, and you are going to have an accident, right? Because that would take care of the problem. But that's not the way it works. And so a heart attack, any kind of serious accident, you're looking at huge bills. You don't have health insurance because you don't have a job. That's a big problem. Can't pay your health insurance bills, and who pays? Those of us who have health insurance. Because the doctors who work in that hospital, and the nurses who work in the hospital, and the cafeteria workers in the hospital, and the people who clean the rooms, and the people who change the beds, and the people who run the tests, they all need to get paid. So somebody pays for it. That's why we have Medicaid. That's one of the big reasons to have Medicaid and Medicare, is so that we've got a way of providing health insurance so that it doesn't end up putting too much burden on the people who are working. In a time when you have a lot of people not working, you have a lot of people demanding, there's a lot of increased demand for those services. It's by design. It's the values that we have, whether it's self-preservation or because we think it's the right thing. So in the last decade, we've added 700,000 people to the population of the state of Colorado. We have almost 100,000 more students in K-12 education. We have 35,000 more students in our higher education system. We have 150,000 more people on Medicaid. We have 2,500 more prisoners. We have 26% more cars on the road, registered vehicles on the road, and we have the same amount of tax dollars that we did 10 years ago. Now you can decide whether that is a spending problem or a revenue problem. Call it whatever you want, but it's actually a pretty simple problem. We want more than we currently have money to pay for. And thank goodness there's a few people that we've elected, and a few people among us who've said, wait a minute, I want us to have options here. I don't want the choices that we have to be limited to additional cuts in schools or higher education or K-12 or healthcare. I want to have other options. So Senator Raleigh Heath, one of Irene's colleagues, moved through the process a measure that would put on the ballot, give us as voters in November, the opportunity to take our tax rates back to where they were in 1999 for both income taxes and sales tax. You're going to hear a lot of things about this over the next few months. Well, you probably won't hear a lot about it because we don't have any money to run much of a campaign. So you're probably not going to hear a lot about it, but you may hear. But this is all about trying to fund that unproductive public sector in some crazy way. Well, let me just throw this theory out there. I read all the time that tax rates are related to economic activity. That taxes are directly related to job creation. I don't think it's true, to be quite honest with you, and I believe I have all the research on my side that tells you that that's not true. But let's assume for a minute that I'm wrong, and that is in fact true. Why wouldn't we go back to the tax rates that we had in 1999, and 95, and 92, when Colorado's economy was the fastest growing in the country? If there is in fact a relationship between taxes and economic growth, here's our economic development policy. Let's go back to the tax rates we had when our economy was really growing. And that's what the Proposition 25 does. Over the next 5 years, it's limited, those tax increases are limited to 5 years. In 2016, we will revert back to the rates that we have today, unless the voters come back in and make a change. And I'll talk a little bit more about why we did it that way in a minute. But so it's a 5-year proposal. In that 5 years, it'll raise about $2.9, almost $3 billion to invest in higher education, K-12 education, and preschool education. It's designed to say all that new money has to go to those areas. So we have to start at where we funded in 2012. Now remember, where we funded in 2012 was 49th in the country. Per pupil, it was $300 some, $87 less a kid for K-12. It was almost $800